Hey, what's up, y'all? So, chapter 21. I apologize for the trash guy in the back. The background noise. It's the day where they pick up the trash, so the trash truck is coming through. 21. The Marines march on. When old Dr. Breed, with the help of Miss Faust, had passed out the Christmas chocolate bars to the girls, we returned to his office. There, he said to me, "Where were we? Oh, yes." And the old man asked me to think of the United States Marines in a godforsaken swamp. Their trucks and tanks and howitzers are wallowing, he complained, sinking in stinking miasma and ooze. He raised a finger and winked at me. But suppose, young man, that one Marine had with him a tiny capsule containing a seed of ice-9, a new way for the atoms of water to stack and lock to freeze. If that Marine threw that seed into the nearest puddle, the puddle would freeze, I guessed, and all the muck around the puddle, it would freeze, and all the puddles in the frozen muck, they would freeze, and the pools and the streams in the frozen muck, they would freeze. You bet they would, he cried, and the United States Marines would rise from the swamp and march on. 22, member of the Yellow Press. There is such stuff, I asked. No, said Dr. Bree, losing patience with me again. I only told you all this in order to give you some insight to the extraordinary novelty of the ways in which Felix was likely to approach an old problem. What I've just told you is what he told the Marine general who was hounding him about mud. Felix ate alone here in the cafeteria every day. It was ruled that no one was to sit with him to interrupt his chain of thought. But the Marine barged in, pulled up a chair, and started talking about mud. What I told you was Felix's offhand reply. There really isn't such a thing? I just told you there wasn't, cried Dr. Breed hotly. Felix died shortly after that, and if you've been listening to what I've been trying to tell you about pure research men, you wouldn't ask such a question. Pure research men work on what fascinates them, not on what fascinates other people. I keep thinking about that swamp. You can stop thinking about it. I've made the only point I wanted to make with the swamp. If the streams flowing through the swamp froze as ice-9, what about the rivers and lakes the streams fed? They'd freeze, but there is no such thing as ice-9. And the oceans, the frozen rivers fed? And the oceans, the frozen rivers fed? They'd freeze, of course, he snapped. I suppose you're getting to rush to market with a sensational story about ice-9 now. I tell you again, it does not exist. And the springs feeding the frozen lakes? And streams and all the water underground feeding the springs? They'd freeze, damn it, he cried. But if I had known that you were a member of the Yellow Press, he said grandly, rising to his feet, I wouldn't have wasted a minute with you. And the rain? When it fell, it would freeze into the hard little hobnails of ice-9. And that would be the end of the world and the end of the interview too. Goodbye. 23, the last batch of brownies. Dr. Bree was mistaken about at least one thing. There was such thing as ice-9, and ice-9 was on Earth. Ice-9 was the last gift Felix Vonnegut created for mankind before going to his just reward. He did it without anyone's realizing what he was doing. He did it without leaving records of what he'd done. True elaborate apparatus was necessary in the act of creation, but already existed in the research laboratory. Mr. Vonnegut had only to go calling on laboratory neighbors, borrowing this and that, making a winsome neighborhood nuisance of himself, until, so to speak, he had baked his last batch of brownies. He had made a chip of ice-9. It was blue-white. It had a melting point of 114.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Felix Vonnegut had put the chip in a little bottle, and he put the bottle in his pocket, and he had gone to his cottage on Cape Cod with his 3 children, there intending to celebrate Christmas. Angela had been 34, Frank had been 24, little New had been 18. The old man had died on Christmas Eve, having told only his children about ice-9. His children had divided the ice-9 among themselves. What a wampitir is. Which brings me to the Bacchus concept of wampitir. A wampitir is the pivot of karas. No karas is without a wampitir. Bokanon tells us, just as no wheel is without a hub, anything can be a wampitir. A tree, a rock, an animal, an idea, a book, a melody, the Holy Grail. Whatever it is, the members of its karas revolve around it in the majestic chaos of a spiral nebula. The orbits of the members of a Karas about their common Wampatir are spiritual orbits naturally. It is souls and not bodies that revolve, as Balkanen invites us to sing. Around and around and around we spin, with feet of lead and wings of tin. And Wampatirs come and Wampatirs go, Balkanen tells us. At any given time, a Karas actually has two Wampatirs, one waxing in importance, one waning. And I am almost certain that while I was talking to Dr. Breed in Ilium, the Wampatir, my Karas, that was just coming into bloom was a crystalline form of water, the blue-white gem, that seed of doom called Ice 9. While I was talking to Dr. Breed in Ilium, Angela Franklin and Nguyen Honecker had in their possession seeds of Ice 9, seeds grown from their father's seed, chips, in a manner of speaking, off the old block. What to become of those three chips was, I am convinced, a principal concern of my Karas. 25, the main thing about Dr. Honecker. So much for now for the Wampatir my Karas. After my unpleasant interview with Dr. Breed in the research laboratory of the General Forge and Foundry Company, I was put into the hands of Miss Faust. Her orders were to show me the door. I prevailed upon her, however, to show me the laboratory of the late Dr. Honecker first. En route, I asked her how well she had known Dr. Honecker. She gave me a frank and interesting reply, and a piquant smile to go with it. I don't think he was knowable. I mean, when most people talk about knowing somebody a lot or a little, they're talking about secrets they've been told or haven't been told. They're talking about intimate. They're talking about intimate family things, love things. Like, I don't think he was knowable. I mean, when most people talk about knowing somebody a lot or a little, they're talking about secrets they've been told or haven't been told. They're talking about intimate things, family things, love things. That nice old lady said to me, Dr. Honecker had all those things in his life the way every living person has to, but they weren't the main things with him. What were the main things, I asked her. Dr. Bree keeps telling me the main thing with Dr. Honecker was truth. You don't seem to disagree. Or you don't seem to agree. I don't know whether I agree or not. I just have trouble understanding how truth, all by itself, could be enough for a person. Miss Faust was ripe for volcanism. What God is, 26. Did you ever talk to Dr. Honecker? I asked Miss Faust. Oh, certainly. I talked to him a lot. Do any conversations stick in your mind? There was one where he bet I couldn't tell him anything that was absolutely true, so I said to him, God is love. There was one where he bet I couldn't tell him anything that was absolutely true. God is love. And what did he say? He said, what is God? What is love? But God really is love, you know, said Miss Faust, no matter what Dr. Honecker said. Men from Mars, 27. The room that had been the laboratory of Dr. Felix Honecker was on the 6th floor, the top floor of the building. A purple cord had been stretched across the doorway, and a brass plate on the wall explained why the room was sacred. In this room, Dr. Felix Honecker, Nobel laureate in physics, spent the last 28 years of his life. There was the frontier of knowledge. Where he was, there was a frontier of knowledge. The importance of this one man in the history of mankind is incalculable. Miss Faust offered to unshackle the purple cord for me so that I might go inside and traffic more intimately with whatever ghosts there were. I accepted. It's just as he left it, she said, except that there were rubber bands all over the counter. Rubber bands? Don't ask me what for, don't ask me what of all this is for. The old man had left the laboratory a mess. What engaged my attention at once was the quantity of cheap toys lying around. There was a paper kite and a broken spine. There was a toy gyroscope wound with string, ready to whir and balance itself. There was a top, there was a bubble pipe, there was a fishbowl with a castle, 2 turtles in it. He loved 10-cent stories, said Miss Faust. I can see he did. Some of his most famous experiments were performed with equipment that cost less than $1. A penny saved is a penny earned. There were numerous pieces of conventional laboratory equipment too, of course, but they seemed drab accessories to the cheap gay toys. Dr. Honecker's desk was piled with correspondence. I don't think he ever answered a letter, mused Miss Faust. People had to get him on the telephone and come to see him if they wanted an answer. There was a framed photograph on his desk. The back was toward me, and I ventured guess as to whose picture was his wife? No. One of his children? No. Himself? No. So I took a look. I found that the picture was of an humble little war memorial in front of a small-town courthouse. Part of the memorial was a sign that gave the names of those villagers who had died in various wars. I thought that the sign must be reason for the photograph. I could read the names and I half expected to find the name Homemaker among them. It wasn't there. That was one of his hobbies, said Miss Faust, was photographing how cannonballs are stacked on different courthouse lawns. Apparently how they've got them stacked in the picture is very unusual. I see. He was an unusual man, I agree. Maybe in a million years everybody will be as smart as he was and see things the way he did. But compared with the average person of today, he was so different as a man from Mars. He was different as a man from Mars. Maybe he really was a Martian, I suggested. Hello! That would certainly go a long way towards explaining his 3 strange kids. 28, mayonnaise. While Miss Faust and I waited for an elevator to take us to the first floor, Miss Faust said she hoped the elevator that came would not be number 5. Before I would ask her why this was a reasonable wish, number 5 arrived. Its operator was a small and ancient African-American whose name was Lemon Enders Knowles. Knowles was insane, I'm almost sure, offensively so, in that he grabbed his own behind and cried, yes, yes, whenever he felt that he made a point. Hello, fellow anthropoids and lily pads and paddle wheels, he said to Miss Faust and me. Yes, yes. First floor, please, said Miss Faust coldly. All Knowles had to do to close the door and get us to the first floor was to press a button, but he wasn't going to do that yet. He wasn't going to do it maybe for years. Man told me, he said, that these here elevators was a Mayan architecture. I never knew that till today, and I says to him, what's that make me, mayonnaise? Yes, yes, and while he was thinking that over, I hit him with the question that strained him up and made him think twice as hard. Yes, yes. Will you please go down, Mr. Knowles, begged Miss Faust. I said to him, said Knowles, this here is a research laboratory. Research means look again, don't it? Means they're looking for something they found once and it got away somehow. And now they got to research for it. How come they got to build a building like this with mayonnaise elevators and all, and fill it with all these crazy people? What is this they're trying to find again? Who lost what? Yes, yes. It's very interesting, sighed Miss Faust. Now, could we go down? Only way we can go is down, barked Knowles. This here's the top. You asked me to go up, and wouldn't be a thing I could do for you. Yes, yes. So let's go down, said Miss Faust. Very soon now. This gentleman here been paying his respects to Dr. Honecker. Yes, I said. Did you know him? Intimately, he said. You know what I said when he died? No, I said Dr. Honecker. He ain't dead. Oh. Just entered a new dimension. Yes, yes. He punched the button and down we went. Did you know the Honecker children, I asked him? Babies full of rabies, he said. Yes, yes. 29, gone but not forgotten. There was one more thing I wanted to do in the Ilium. I wanted to get a photograph of the old man's tomb. So I went back to my room, found Sandra gone, picked up my camera, hired a cab. Sleet was still coming down, acid and gray. I thought the old man's tombstone and all that sleet might photograph pretty well. Might even make a good picture for the jacket of the day the world ended. The custodian at the cemetery gate told me how to find the Honecker burial plot. Can't miss it, he said. It's got the biggest marker in the place. He did not lie. The marker was an alabaster phallus 20 feet high and 3 feet thick. It was plastered with sleet. By God, I exclaimed, getting out of the cab with my camera. How's that for a suitable memorial to a father of the atom bomb, I laughed. I asked the driver if he'd mind standing by the monument in order to give some idea of scale, and then I asked him to wipe away some of the sleet so the name of the deceased would show. He did so, and there on the shaft in letters 6 inches high, so help me God, was the word mother. 30, only sleeping. Mother, asked the driver incredulously. I wiped away more sleet and uncovered this poem. Mother, mother, how I pray for you to guard us every day, Angela Honecker. Under this poem was yet another. You are not dead, but only sleeping. We should smile and stop our weeping. Franklin Honecker. And underneath this, inset in the shaft, was a square of cement bearing the imprint of an infant's hand. Beneath the imprint were the words, Baby Newt. If that's mother, said the driver, who in the hell could they have raised over father? He made an obscene suggestion as to what the appropriate marker might be. We found father close by. His memorial, as specified in his will, I later discovered, was a marble cube, 40 centimeters on each side. Father, it said. Another breed. As we were leaving the cemetery, the driver of the cab, worried about the condition of his own mother's grave, he asked if I would mind taking a short detour to look at it. It was a pathetic little stone that marked his mother, not that it mattered, and the driver asked me if I would mind another brief detour, this time to a tombstone sales room across the street from the cemetery. I wasn't a botanist then, so I agreed with some peevishness. As a botanist, of course, I would have agreed gaily to go anywhere anyone suggested. As Bokanon says, peculiar travel suggestions are dancing lessons from God. The name of the tombstone establishment was Abram Breed and Sons. As the driver talked to the salesman, I wandered among the monuments, blank monuments, monuments in memory of nothing so far. I found a little institutional joke in the showroom. Over a stone angel hung mistletoe. Cedar boughs were heaped on her pedestal, and around her marble throat was a necklace of Christmas tree lamps. How much for her? Asked the salesman. Not for sale. She's 100 years old. My great-grandfather, Abram Breed, carved her. This business is that old. That's right. And you're a Breed? The fourth generation in this location. Any relation to Dr. Asa Breed, the director of the research laboratory? His brother. He said his name was Marvin Breed. It's a small world, I observed. When he put it in a cemetery, it is. Marvin Breed was a sleek and vulgar, smart and sentimental man. 32, dynamite money. I just came from your brother's office. I'm a writer. I was interviewing him about Dr. Honecker, I said to Marvin Breed. There was one queer son of a bitch, not my brother, I mean Honecker. Did he sell him that monument for his wife? I sold his kids that. He didn't have anything to do with it. He never got around to putting any kind of marker on her grave. And then after she'd been dead for a year or more, Honecker's 3 kids came in here, the big tall girl, the boy, and the little baby. They wanted the biggest stone money could buy, and the older ones had poems they'd written. They wanted the poems on the stone. You can laugh at that stone if you want to, said Marvin Breed, but those kids got more consolation out of that than anything else money could have bought. They used to come and look at it and put flowers on it, I don't know how many times a year. It must have cost a lot. Nobel Prize money bought it. 2 things that money bought, a cottage on Cape Cod and the monument. Dynamite money, I marveled, thinking of the violence of dynamite and the absolute repose of a tombstone and summer home. What? Nobel invented dynamite. Well, I guess it takes all kinds. Had I been a botanist, then... Summer home, what? Nobel invented dynamite? Well, I guess it takes all kinds. Cape Cod and the monument, dynamite money. I marveled thinking of the violence of dynamite and the absolute repose of a tombstone and summer home. What? Nobel invented dynamite. Well, I guess it takes all kinds. Had I been a botanist then, pondering the miraculously intricate chain of events that had brought dynamite money to that particular tombstone company, I might have whispered, busy, busy, busy. Busy, busy, busy is what we botanists whisper. Whenever we think of how complicated and unpredictable the machinery of life really is. But all I could say as a Christian then was, life is sure funny sometimes. Sometimes it isn't, said Marvin Breed. 33, an ungrateful man. I asked Marvin Breed if he'd known Emily Honecker, the wife of Felix, the mother of Angela, Frank, and Newt, the woman under that monstrous shaft. Know her, his voice turned tragic. Did I know her, mister? Sure I knew her. I knew Emily. We went to Ilium High together. We were co-chairmen of the class colors committee then. Her father owned the Ilium music store. She could play every musical instrument there was. I felt so hard for her. I gave up football and tried to play the violin, and then my big brother Asa came home for spring vacation from MIT, and I made the mistake of introducing him to my best girl. Marvin Breed snapped his fingers. He took her away from me just like that. I smashed up my $75 violin on a big brass knob at the foot of my bed, and I went down to a florist shop and got the kind of box they put a dozen roses in. I put the busted fiddle in the box, and I sent it to her by Western Union messenger boy. Pretty, was she? Pretty, he echoed, mister. When I see my first lady angel, if God ever sees fit to show me one, it'll be her wings and not her face that'll make my mouth fall open. I've already seen the prettiest face that ever could be. There wasn't a man in Ilium County who wasn't in love with her, secretly or otherwise. She could have had any man she wanted. He spit on his floor, and she had to go and marry that little Dutch son of a bitch. She was engaged to my brother, and then that sneaky little bastard hit town. Marvin Breed snapped his fingers. He took her away from my big brother like that. I suppose it's high treason and ungrateful and ignorant and backward and anti-electrical to call a dead man as famous as Felix Honecker, son of a bitch. I know about how harmless and gentle and dreamy he was supposed to be, how he never hurt a fly, how he didn't care about money and power and fancy clothes and automobiles and things, how he wasn't like the rest of us, how he was better than the rest of us, and how he was so innocent he was practically a Jesus except for the Son of God part. Marvin Breed felt it was necessary to complete his thought. I had to ask him to do it. But what? He said, but what? He went to a window looking out at a cemetery gate. But what? He murmured at the gate in the sleet in the Vonnegut shaft that could be dimly seen. But he said, but how innocent is a man who helps make a thing like an atomic bomb? How can you say a man that had a good mind when he couldn't even bother to do anything when the best-hearted, most beautiful woman in the world, his own wife, was dying for lack of love and understanding? He shuddered. Sometimes I wonder if he wasn't born dead. I never met a man who was less interested in the living. Sometimes I think that's the trouble with the world. Too many people in high places who are stone cold dead. Crazy. 34. I was in the tombstone sales room that I had first Vonnegut, a botanist, word meaning a sudden, very personal shove in the direction of botanism, in the direction of believing that God Almighty knew all about me. After all, that God Almighty had some pretty elaborate plans for me. The Vonnegut had to do with the stone angel under the mistletoe. The cab driver had gotten it into his head that he had to have that angel for his mother's grave at any price. He was standing in front of it with tears in his eyes. Marvin Breen was still staring out the window at the cemetery gate, having just said his piece about Felix Vonnegut. The little Dutch son of a bitch may have been a modern holy man, he added, but goddamn it if he ever did anything he didn't want to, and goddamn if he didn't get everything he ever wanted. Music, he said. Music, he said. Pardon me, I asked. That's why she married him. She said his mind was tuned to the biggest music there was, the music of the stars. He shook his head. Crap. And then the gate reminded him of the last time he'd seen Frank Vonnegut, the model ship maker. What? And then the gate reminded him of the last time he'd seen Frank Vonnegut, the model maker, the tormentor of bug in jars. Frank, he said, what about him? The last I saw of that poor, queer kid was when he came out from that cemetery gate. His father's funeral was still going on. The old man wasn't underground yet, and out through the gate came Frank. He raised his thumb at the first car that came by. It wasn't a new Pontiac with the Florida license plate. It was a new Pontiac with the... It stopped. Frank got in it, and that was the last anybody in Ilium ever saw of him. I hear he's wanted by the police. That was an accident, a freak. Frank wasn't any criminal. He didn't have that kind of nerve. The only work he was any good at was model making. The only job he ever had on to was at Jack's hobby shop, selling models, making models, giving people advice on how to make models. When he cleared out of here, went to Florida, he got a job in the model shop in Sarasota. Turned out the model shop was a front for a ring that stole Cadillacs, ran them straight on board old LSTs and shipped them to Cuba. That's how Frank got balled up and all that. I expect the reason the cops haven't found him is he's dead. He just hurt too much while he was sticking Tourette's on the battleship Missouri with Duca Cement. He just hurt too much while he was sticking Tourette's on the battleship Missouri with Duca Cement. Where's New now, do you know? Guess he's with his sister in Indianapolis. Last I heard was he got mixed up with that Russian midget and flunked out of pre-med at Cornell. Can you imagine a midget trying to become a doctor? And in that same miserable family, there's that great big gawky girl over 6 feet tall. That man who's so famous for having a great mind. He pulled that girl out of high school in her sophomore year so he could go on having some woman take care of him. All she had going for her was that clarinet she played in the Ilium High School band, the Marching 100. After she left school, said Bree, nobody ever asked her out. She didn't have any friends, and the old man never even thought to give her any money to go anywhere. You know what she used to do? Nope. Every so often at night, she'd lock herself in her room and she'd play records and she'd play along with the records on her clarinet. The miracle of this age, as far as I'm concerned, is that that woman never got herself a husband. How much do you want for this angel? Asked the cab driver. I told you it's not for sale. I don't suppose there's anybody around who can do that kind of stone cutting anymore, I observed. I got a nephew who can't, said Breed. Asa's boy. He was all set to be a big research scientist, and then they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, and the kid quit, and he got drunk, and he came out here, and he told me he wanted to go to work cutting stone. He works here now? He's a sculptor in Rome. If somebody offered you enough, said the driver, you'd take it, wouldn't you? Might, but it would take a lot of money. Where would you put the name on a thing like that? Asked the driver. There's already a name on it, on the pedestal. We couldn't see the name because of the bows banked against the pedestal. It was never called for. I wanted to know. It was never paid for, the way the story goes. This German immigrant was on his way west with the wife, and she died of smallpox here in Lyrium. So he ordered the angel to be put up over her, and he showed my great-grandfather he had the cash to pay for it, but then he was robbed. Somebody took practically every cent he had. All he had left in the world was some land he bought in Indiana, land he never seen. So he moved on, said he'd be back later to pay for the angel. But he never came back, I asked. Nope. Marvin Breeden nudged some of the bows aside with his toe so that we could see the raised letters on the pedestal. There was a last name written there. There's a screwy name for you, he said. If that immigrant had any descendants, I expect them to Americanize the name. I expect they Americanized the name. They're probably Jones or Black or Thompson now. There you're wrong, I murmured. The room seemed to tip, and its walls and ceiling and floor were transformed momentarily into the mouth of many tunnels leading in all directions through time. I had a Bacchus vision of the unity in every second of all time and all wandering mankind, all wandering... What? Oh, no. I had a Bacchus vision of the unity in every second of all time and all wandering mankind, all wandering womankind, all wandering children. There you are wrong, I said, when the vision was gone. You know some people by that name? Yes. The name was my last name, too. Hobby Shop, 35. On the way back to the hotel, I caught sight of Jack's hobby shop, the place where Franklin Honecker had worked. I told the cab driver to stop and wait. I went on in and found Jack himself, presiding over his teeny-weeny fire engines, railroad trains, airplanes, boats, houses, lampposts, trees, tanks, rockets, automobiles, porters, conductors, policemen, firemen, mommies, daddies, cats, dogs, chickens, soldiers, ducks, and cows. He was a cadaverous man, a serious man, a dirty man, and he coughed a lot. What kind of a boy was Franklin Honecker, he echoed, and he coughed and coughed. He shook his head and showed me that he adored Frank as much as he'd ever adored anybody. This isn't a question I have to answer with words. I can show you what kind of a boy Franklin Honecker was, he coughed. You can look, he said, and you can judge for yourself. And he took me down to the basement of his store. He lived down there. There was a double bed and a dresser and a hot plate. Jack apologized for the unmade bed. My wife left me a week ago, he coughed. I'm still trying to pull the strings of my life back together. And then he turned on the switch, and the far end of the basement was filled with a blinding light. We approached the light and found that it was sunshine to a fantastic little country built on plywood. An island as perfectly rectangular as a township in Kansas. Any restless soul, any soul seeking to find what lay beyond its green boundaries really would fall off the edge of the world. The details were so exquisitely in scale, so cunningly textured and tinted that it was unnecessary for me to squint in order to believe that the nation was real. The hills, the lakes, the rivers, the forests, the towns, and all else that good natives everywhere hold so dear. And everywhere ran a spaghetti pattern of railroad tracks. Look at the doors of the houses, said Jack reverently. Neat, keen. They got real knobs on them, and the knockers really work. God, you asked what kind of a boy Franklin Honecker was? He built this, Jack choked up. All by himself. Well, I helped some, but anything I did was according to his plans. That kid was a genius. How could anybody argue with you? His kid brother was a midget, you know. I know. He did some of the soldering underneath. It sure looks real. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't done overnight either. Rome wasn't built in a day. That kid didn't have any home life, you know. I've heard. This was his real home. Thousands of hours he spent down here. Sometimes he wouldn't even run the trains, just saying, look, the way we're doing. There's a lot to see. It's practically like a trip, too. Like a trip to Europe. There are so many things to see if you look close. He'd see things you and I wouldn't see. He'd all of a sudden tear down a hill that wouldn't look just as real as any hill you ever saw. To you and me, and he'd be right, too. He put a lake where that hill had been and a trestle over the lake, and it would look 10 times as good as it did before. It isn't a talent everybody has. That's right, said Jack passionately. The passion cost him another coughing fit. When the fit was over, his eyes were watering copiously. Listen, I told that the kid he should go to college and study some engineering so he could go to work for American Flyer or somebody like that. Somebody big, somebody who'd really back all the ideas he had. Looks to me as if you backed him a good deal. Wish I could have, mourned Jack. I didn't have the capital. I gave him stuff whenever I could, but most of the stuff he bought out of what he earned working upstairs for me. He didn't spend a dime on anything but this. Didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't go to movies, didn't go out with girls, wasn't car crazy. This country could certainly use a few more of those. Jack shrugged. Well, I guess the Florida gangsters got him afraid he'd talk. Guess they did. Jack suddenly broke down and cried. I wonder if those dirty sons of bitches, he sobbed, have any idea what it was they killed. 36, meow. During my trip to Ilium and to points beyond a 2-week expedition bridging Christmas. During my trip to Ilium and to points beyond a 2-week expedition bridging Christmas, I let a poor poet named Sherman Krebs have my New York City apartment free. My second wife had left me on the grounds that I was too pessimistic for an optimist to live with. Krebs was a bearded man, a platinum blonde Jesus with spaniel eyes. He was no close friend of mine. I had met him at a cocktail party where he presented himself as national chairman of poets and painters for immediate nuclear war. He begged for shelter, not necessarily bomb-proof, and it happened that I had some. When I returned to my apartment, still twanging with my puzzling spiritual implications of the Unclaimed stone angel in Ilium. I found my apartment wrecked by a nihilistic debauch. Krebs was gone, but before leaving, he had run up $300 worth of long-distance calls, set my couch on fire in 5 places, killed my cat and my avocado tree, and torn the door off my medicine cabinet. He wrote this poem in what proved to be excrement on the yellow linoleum floor of my kitchen. I have a kitchen, but it's not a complete kitchen. I will not be truly gay until I have a dispose all. There was another message written in lipstick in a feminine hand on the wallpaper over my bed. It said, "No, no, no," said chicken licking. There was a sign hung around my dead cat's neck. It said, "Meow." I have not seen Krebs since. Nonetheless, I sensed that he was my karas. If he was, he served it as a rang rang. A rang rang, according to Bakanan, is a person who steers people away from a line of speculation by reducing that line. With the example of the rang rang's own life to an absurdity. I might have been vaguely inclined to dismiss the stone angel as meaningless and to go from there to meaningless of all. I might have been vaguely inclined to dismiss the stone angel as meaningless and to go from there to the meaninglessness of all. But after I saw what Krebs had done, and particularly what he had done to my sweet cat, nihilism was not for me. Somebody or something did not wish me to be a nihilist. It was Krebs' mission, whether they knew it or not, to disenchant me with that philosophy. Well done, Mr. Krebs, well done. Nihilist, Nihilist. I'm probably not pronouncing that at all. Chapter 37, a modern major general. And then one day, I found out where the fugitive from justice, the model maker, the great God Jehovah and Beelzebub of bugs and mason jars was, where Franklin Honecker could be found. He was alive. The news was in a special supplement to the New York Sunday Times. The supplement was a paid ad for Banana Republic. On its cover was a profile of the most heartbreakingly beautiful girl I ever hoped to see. Beyond the girl, bulldozers were knocking down palm trees, making a broad avenue. At the end of the avenue were the steel skeletons of 3 new buildings. The Republic of San Lorenzo, said the copy on the cover. On the move, a healthy, happy, progressive, freedom-loving, beautiful nation makes itself extremely attractive to American investors and tourists alike. I was in no hurry to read the contents. The girl on the cover was enough for me, more than enough, since I had fallen in love with her on sight. She was very young and very grave, too, and luminously compassionate and wise. She was as brown as chocolate. Her hair was like golden flax. Her name was Mona Amins Manzano, the cover said. She was the adopted daughter of the dictator of the island. I opened the supplement, hoping for more pictures of the sublime mongrel Madonna. I found instead a portrait of the island's dictator, Miguel Papa Manzano, a guerrilla in his late 70s. Next to Papa's portrait was a picture of a narrow-shouldered, fox-faced, immature young man. He wore a snow-white military blouse with some sort of jeweled sunburst hanging on it. His eyes were close together. They had circles under them. He had apparently told barbers all his life to shave the sides and back of his head, but to leave the top of his hair alone. He had a wiry pompadour, a sort of cube of hair, marbled that arose to an incredible height. This unattractive child was identified as Major General Franklin Honecker, Minister of Science and Progress in the Republic of San Lorenzo. He was 26 years old. 38. Barracuda, capital of the world. San Lorenzo was 50 miles long and 20 miles wide. I learned from the supplement to the New York Sunday Times. Its population was 450,000 souls, all fiercely dedicated to the ideals of the free world. Its highest point, Mount McCabe, was 11,000 feet above sea level. Its capital was Bolivar, a strikingly modern city built on a harbor capable of sheltering the entire United States Navy. Principal exports were sugar, coffee, bananas, indigo, and handcrafted novelties. And sports fishermen recognized San Lorenzo as the unchallenged Barracuda capital of the world. I wonder how Franklin Honecker, who had never even finished high school, had gotten himself such a fancy job. I found a partial answer in an essay on San Lorenzo that was signed by Papa Manzano. Papa said that Frank was the architect of the San Lorenzo master plan, which included new roads, rural electrification, sewage disposal plants, hotels, hospitals, clinics, railroads, the works. And though the essay was brief and tightly edited, Papa referred to Frank 5 times as the blood son of The blood son of Dr. Felix Honecker. The phrase reeked of cannibalism. Papa plainly felt that Frank was a chunk of the old man's magic meat. Fata Morgana, 39. A little more light was shed by another essay in the supplement, a florid essay titled, What San Lorenzo has meant to one American. It was almost certainly ghostwritten, and it was signed by Major General Franklin Honecker. In the essay, Frank told of being all alone on a newly swamped 68-foot Chris craft in the Caribbean. He didn't explain what he was doing on it or how he happened to be alone. He did indicate, though, that his point of departure had been Cuba. The luxurious pleasure craft was going down, and my meaningless life with it, said the essay. All I needed for 4 days was 2 biscuits and a seagull. The dorsal fins of man-eating sharks were cleaving the warm seas around me, and needle-teethed barracuda were making those waters boil. I raised my eyes to my maker, willing to accept whatever his decision might be, and my eyes alit on a glorious mountain peak above the clouds. Was this Fata Morgana the cruel deception of a mirage? I looked up Fata Morgana at this point in my reading, learned that it was in fact a mirage named after Morgan Le Fay, a fairy who lived at the bottom of a lake. It was famous for appearing in the Strait of Messina between Calabria and Sicily. Fata Morgana was poetic crap in short. What Frank saw from his sinking pleasure craft was not cruel Fata Morgana, but the peak of Mount McCabe. Gentle seas that nuzzled Frank's pleasure craft to the rocky shores of San Lorenzo as though God wanted him to go there. Frank stepped ashore, dry shot, and asked where he was. The essay didn't say so, but the son of a bitch had a piece of Ice 9 with him in a thermos jug. Frank, having no passport, was put in jail in the capital city of Bolivar. He was visited there by Papa Manzana, who wanted to know if it were possible that Frank was the blood relative of the immortal Dr. Felix Honecker. I admitted I was, said Frank in the essay. Since that moment, every door to opportunity in San Lorenzo has been opened wide open to me. 40. House of Hope and Mercy. As it happened as it was supposed to happen, Bacchanal would say, I was assigned by a magazine to do a story in San Lorenzo. The story wasn't to be about Papa Manzano or Frank. It was to be about Julian Castle, an American sugar millionaire who had at the age of 40 followed the example of Dr. Albert Schweitzer by founding a free hospital in the jungle by devoting his life to miserable folk of another race. Castle's hospital was called the House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle. His jungle was on San Lorenzo among the wild coffee trees on the northern slope of Mount McCabe. When I flew to San Lorenzo, Julian Castle was 60 years old. He had been absolutely unselfish for 20 years. In his selfish days, he had been as familiar to tabloid readers as Tommy Manville, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and Barbara Hutton. His fame had rested on lechery, alcoholism, reckless driving, and draft evasion. He had had a dazzling talent for spending millions without increasing mankind's stores of anything but charging. He had dazzling talent for spending millions without increasing mankind's stores of anything but charging. He had been married 5 times, had produced 1 son. The 1 son, Philip Castle, was the manager and owner of the hotel which I planned to stay. The hotel was called the Casa Mona and was named after Mona Amens Manzano, the blonde negro on the cover of the supplement to the New York Sunday Times. The Casa Mona was brand new. It was one of the 3 new buildings in the background of the supplement's portrait of Mona. While I didn't feel that purposeful seas were wafting me to San Lorenzo, I did feel that love was doing the job. The Fata Morgana, the mirage of what it would be like to be loved by Mona Amens Manzano, had become a tremendous force in my meaningless life. I imagined that she could make me far happier than any woman had so far succeeded in doing. 41. A Carras built for 2. The seating on the airplane bound ultimately for San Lorenzo from Miami was 3 and 3 as it happened, as it was supposed to happen. My seatmates were Horlick Minton, the new American ambassador to the Republic of San Lorenzo, and his wife Claire. They were white-haired, gentle, and frail. Minton told me that he was a career diplomat holding the rank of ambassador for the first time. He and his wife had so far served, he told me, in Bolivia, Chile, Japan, France, Yugoslavia, Egypt, the Union of South Africa, Liberia, and Pakistan. They were lovebirds. They entertained each other endlessly with little gifts. Sights worth seeing out of the plane window, amusing or instructive bits from things they read, random recollections of times gone by. Were, I think, a flawless example of Bocanon calls a depras. They were, I think, a flawless example of what Bocanon calls a depras, which is Carras composed of only 2 persons. A true dupras, Bocanon tells us, can't be invaded, not even by children born of such a union. I exclude the Mintons, therefore, from my own Karaz, from Frank's Karaz, from Newt's Karaz, from Asa Breed's Karaz, from Angela's Karaz, from Lyman Ender Knowles' Karaz, from Sherman Krebs' Karaz. The Mintons' Karaz was a tidy one, composed of only 2. I should think you'd be very pleased, I said to Minton. What should I be pleased about? Pleased to have the rank of ambassador. From the pitying way Minton and his wife looked at each other, I gathered that I had said a fat-headed thing, but they humored me. Yes, winced Minton. I'm very pleased, he smiled wanly. I'm deeply honored. And so on went with almost every subject I brought up. I couldn't make the Mintons bubble about anything. For instance, I suppose you can speak a lot of languages, I said. Oh, 6 or 7 between us, said Minton. That must be very gratifying. What must? Being able to speak to people of so many different nationalities. Very gratifying, said Minton emptily. Very gratifying, said his wife. And they went back to reading a fat, typewritten manuscript that was spread across the chair arm between them. Tell me, I said a little later, in all your wide travels, have you found people everywhere about the same at heart? That's Minton. Do you find people to be about the same at heart wherever you go? He looked at his wife, making sure she had heard the question, and turned back to me. About the same wherever you go, he agreed. I said. Boganon tells us, incidentally, that members of a Dupras always die within a week of each other. When it came time for the men to die, they did it within the same second. Bicycles for Afghanistan. 42. There was a small saloon in the rear of the plane, and I repaired there for a drink. It was there that I met another fellow American, H. Lowe Crosby of Evanston, Illinois, and his wife Hazel. They were heavy people in their 50s. They spoke twangingly. Crosby told me that he owned a bicycle factory in Chicago, that he had nothing but ingratitude from his employees. He was going to move his business to grateful San Lorenzo. You know San Lorenzo well, I asked. This will be the first time I ever seen it, but everything I heard about it I like, said H. Lowe Crosby. They've got discipline. They got something you can count on from one year to the next. They don't have the government encourage everybody to be some kind of original passant nobody ever heard of before. Sir, Christ, back in Chicago, we don't make bicycles anymore. It's all human relations now. The eggheads sit around trying to figure out new ways for everybody to be happy. Nobody can get fired no matter what. And if somebody does accidentally make a bicycle, the union accuses us of cruel and inhuman practices, and the government confiscates the bicycle for back taxes and gives it to a blind man in Afghanistan. And you think things will be better in San Lorenzo? I know damn well they will be. The people down there are poor enough and scared enough and ignorant enough to have some common sense. Crosby asked me what my name was and what my business was. I told him, and his wife Hazel recognized my name as an Indiana name. She was from Indiana too. My gosh, she said, are you a Hoosier? I admitted I was. I'm a Hoosier too, she crowed. Nobody has to be ashamed of being a Hoosier. I'm not, I said. I never knew anybody who was. Hoosiers do all right. Lo and I never been around the world twice. I have been around the world twice, and everywhere we went, we found Hoosiers in charge of everything. That's reassuring. You know the manager of that new hotel in Istanbul? No, he's a Hoosier. Military, whatever he is in Tokyo. Attaché, said her husband. He's a Hoosier, said Hazel. And the new ambassador to Yugoslavia? A Hoosier, I asked. Not only him, but the Hollywood editor of Life magazine too, and that man in Chile, a Hoosier too. You can't go anywhere a Hoosier hasn't made his mark, she said. The man who wrote Ben-Hur was a Hoosier, and James Whitcomb Riley. Are you from Indiana too? I asked her husband. Nope, I'm a prairie stater, land of Lincoln, as they say. As far as that goes, said Hazel triumphantly, Lincoln was a Hoosier too. He grew up in Spencer County. Sure, I said. I don't know what it is about Hoosiers, said Hazel, but they've sure got something. If somebody was to make a list, they'd be amazed. That's true, I said. She grasped me firmly by the arm. We Hoosiers got to stick together. Right. You call me Mom. What? Whenever I meet a young Hoosier, I tell him, you call me Mom. Uh-huh. Let me hear you say it, she urged. Mom. She smiled and let go of my arm. Some piece of clockwork had completed its cycle. My calling Hazel Mom had shut it off, and now Hazel was rewinding it for the next Hoosier to come along. Hazel's obsession with Hoosiers around the world was a textbook example of false karas, of a seeming team that was meaningless in terms of the way God gets things done. A textbook example of what Balkanon calls a ground falloon. Other examples of ground falloons are the Communist Party, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the General Electric Company, the International Order of Odd Fellows, and any nation, anytime, anywhere. As Balkanon invites us to sing along with him, if you wish to study a ground falloon, just remove the skin of a toy balloon. I don't know. I'm gonna read another 15 minutes. The video will be an hour long. I'll try to upload it. I'm really taking a long time on this book, to be honest. H. Lowe Crosby was of, how many pages is this book? This page is almost 300. The Demonstrator. Number 43, The Demonstrator. H. Lowe Crosby was of the opinion that dictatorships were often very good things. He wasn't a terrible person and he wasn't a fool. It suited him to confront the world with a certain barnyard clownishness, but many of the things he had to say about undisciplined mankind were not only funny but true. The major point at which his reason and his sense of humor left him was when he approached the question of what people were really supposed to do with their time on Earth. He believed firmly that they were meant to build bicycles for him. I hope San Lorenzo was very bit as good as you heard it, as I said. Only have to walk to one man and find out if it is or not, he said. When Papa Manzano gives his word of honor about anything on that little island, that's it. That's how it is. That's how it will be. The thing I like, said Hazel, is they all speak English and they're all Christians. That makes things go much easier. You know how they deal with crime down there? Crosby asked. Nope. They just don't have any crime down there, Papa. Manzano's made crime so damn unattractive, nobody even thinks about it without getting sick. I heard you can lay a billfold in the middle of the sidewalk and you can come back a week later and it'll be right there with everything still in it. You know what the punishment is for stealing something? Nope. The hook, he said. No fines, no probation, no 30 days in jail. It's the hook. The hook for stealing, for murder, for arson, for treason, for rape, for being a peeping Tom. Break a law, any damn law at all, and it's the hook. Everybody can understand that. San Lorenzo was the best behaved country in the world. What is the hook? They put up a gallows, see, 2 posts and a crossbeam, and they take a great big kind of ironfish hook and they hang it from the crossbeam. They take somebody who's dumb enough to break the law and put them on the point of the hook and through one side of his belly and out the other, and they let him go. And there he hangs by God, one damn sorry lawbreaker. Good God. I don't say it's good, said Crosby, but I don't say it's bad either. I sometimes wonder if something like that wouldn't clear up juvenile delinquency. Maybe the hook's a little extreme for democracy. Public hanging's more like it. Shrink up a few teenage car thieves on lampposts in front of their houses with signs around their necks saying, Mama, here's your boy. Do that a few times and I think ignition locks will go the way of a rumble seat on the running board. We saw that thing in the basement of the waxworks in London, said Hazel. What thing, I asked her. The hook. Down in the Chamber of Horrors in the basement, they had a wax person hanging from the hook. It looked so real I wanted to throw up. Harry Truman didn't look anything like Harry Truman, said Crosby. Pardon me? And the waxworks, said Crosby. The statue of Truman didn't really look like him. Most of them did, though, said Hazel. Was it anybody in particular hanging from the hook, I asked. I don't think so. It was just somebody. Just a demonstrator, I asked? Yeah, it was a black velvet curtain in front of it, and you had pulled the curtain back to see. And there was a note pinned to the curtain that said children weren't supposed to look. But kids did, said Crosby. There were kids down there, and they all looked. A sign like that is just catnip to kids, said Hazel. How did the kids react when they saw the person on the hook, I asked. Oh, said Hazel, they reacted just about the way the grown-ups did. They just looked at it and didn't say anything, just moved on to see what the next thing was. What was the next thing? It was an iron chair a man had been roasted alive in, said Crosby. He was roasted for murdering his son. Now, only after they roasted him, Hazel recalled blandly, they found out he hadn't murdered his son after all. 44. Communist sympathizers. When I again took my seat beside the due process of Claire and Horlick Minton, I had some new information about them. I got it from the Crosbys. The Crosbys didn't know Minton, but they knew his reputation. They were indignant about his appointment as ambassador. They told me about Minton had once been fired by the State Department for his softness toward communism. And the communist dupes, or worse, had him reinstated. Very pleasant little saloon back there, I said to Min as they sat down. He and his wife were still reading the manuscript that lay between them. Nice bar back there. Good, I'm glad. The two read on, apparently uninterested in talking to me. Then Minton turned to me suddenly with a bittersweet smile, and he demanded, who was he anyway? Who was who? The man you were talking to in the bar. We just went back there for a drink, and when we were just outside, we heard you and the man talking very loudly. He said I was a communist sympathizer. A bicycle manufacturer named H. Lowe Crosby, I said. I felt myself reddening. I was fired for pessimism. Communism has nothing to do with it. I got him fired, said his wife. The only piece of real evidence produced against him was the letter I wrote to the New York Times from Pakistan. I got him fired, said his wife. The only piece of real evidence produced against him was the letter I wrote to the New York Times from Pakistan. What did it say? It said a lot of things, she said, because I was very upset about how Americans couldn't imagine what it was like to be something else and proud of it. Because I was very upset about how Americans couldn't imagine what it was like to be something else. I see. But there was one sentence they kept coming back to again and again in the loyalty hearing, sighed Minton. Americans, he said, quoting his wife's letter to the Times, are forever searching for love in the forms it never takes, and places it can never be. It must have something to do with the vanished frontier. Okay, so Americans, he said, quoting his wife's letter to the Times, are forever searching for love in forms it never takes, in places it can never be. It must have something to do with the vanished frontier. Wow, it's crazy. 45. Why Americans are hated. Claire Minton's letter to the Times was published during the worst of the era of Senator McCarthy, and her husband was fired 12 hours after the letter was printed. Okay, Claire Minton's letter to the Times was published during the worst of the era of Senator McCarthy, and her husband was fired 12 hours after the letter was printed. What was so awful about the letter, I asked? The highest possible form of treason, said man, is to say that Americans are loved wherever they go. It's to say are loved wherever they go, whatever they do. Claire tried to make the point that American foreign policy should recognize hate rather than imagine love. I guess Americans are hated a lot of places. People are hated a lot of places. Claire pointed out in her letter that Americans, in being hated, were simply paying the normal penalty for being people, that they were foolish to think they should somehow be exempted from that penalty. But the loyalty board didn't pay any attention to that, and all they knew was that Claire and I both felt that Americans were unloved. Well, I'm glad the story had a happy ending, said Minton. It finally came out all right, I said. Here you are on your way to an embassy, all your own. Minton and his wife exchanged another of those pitying Dupross glances. And Minton said to me, yes, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow was ours. 46. The Bacchus method for handling Caesar. 46. I talked to the Mintons about the legal status of Franklin Vonnegut, who was, after all, not only a big shot in Papa Manzano's government, but a fugitive from the United States. That's all been written off, said Minton. He isn't a United States citizen anymore, and he seems to be doing good things where he is, so that's that. He gave up his citizenship. Anybody who declares allegiance to a foreign state, or serves in its armed forces, or accepts employment in its government loses his citizenship. Read your passport. You can't leave the sort of funny paper. You can't lead the sort of funny paper international romance that Frank has led, and still have Uncle Sam for another chicken, for a mother chicken. Is he well liked in San Lorenzo? Min weighed in his hands the manuscript he and his wife had been reading. I don't know yet. This book says not. What book is that? It's the only scholarly book ever written about San Lorenzo. Sort of scholarly, said Claire. Sort of scholarly, echoed Minton. Hasn't been published yet. This is one of the 5 copies. He handed it to me, inviting me to read as much as I liked. Opened the book to its title page and found that the name of the book was San Lorenzo, the land, the history, the people. The author was Philip Castle, the son of Julian Castle, the hotel-keeping son of the great altruist I was on my way to see. I let the book fall open where it would. As it happened, it fell open to the chapter about the island's outlawed holy man, Vonnegut. There was a quotation from the books of Vonnegut on the page before me. Those words leaped from the page and into my mind, and they were welcome there. The words were a phrase of the suggestion by Jesus. Render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Vonnegut paraphrase was this: pay no attention to Caesar. Caesar doesn't have the slightest idea what's really going on. Pay no attention to Caesar. Caesar doesn't have the slightest idea of what's really going on. All right, number 47, dynamic tension. So what was that one? That one was called the Bacchus method for handling Caesar. Number 47 is dynamic tension. I became so absorbed in Philip Castle's book that I didn't even look up from it when we put down for 10 minutes in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I didn't even look up when somebody behind me whispered, thrilled, that a midget had come aboard. A little while later, I looked around for the midget, but could not see him. I did see, right in front of Hazel and H. Lowe Crosby, a horse-faced woman with platinum blonde hair, a woman new to the passenger list. Next to hers was a seat that happened and appeared to be empty, a seat that might well have sheltered a midget without my seeing even the top of his head. But it was San Lorenzo, the land, the history, the people, that intrigued me then, so I looked no harder for the midget. Midgets are, after all, diversions for sillier, quiet times, and I was serious and excited about Vonnegut theory of what he called dynamic tension, his sense of a priceless equilibrium between good and evil. When I first saw the term dynamic tension in Philip Castle's book, I laughed what I imagined to be a superior laugh. The term was a favorite of Vonnegut according to young Castle's book, and I suppose that I knew something that Vonnegut didn't know. That the term was one vulgarized by Charles Atlas, a mail-order muscle builder. As I learned when I read on briefly, Bokanon knew exactly who Charles Atlas was. Bokanon was, in fact, an alumnus of his muscle building school. It was a belief of Charles Atlas that muscles could be built without bars, or spring exercises could be built by simply pitting one set of muscles against the other. It was the belief of Bokanon that good societies could be built only by pitting good against evil. It was a belief of Bokanon that good societies could be built only by pitying good against evil and by keeping the tension between the two high at all times. And in Castle's book, I read my first Bacchantism poem, or Calypso. It went like this. And in Castle's book, I read my first Bacchanist poem, or Calypso. It went like this. Papa Manzano, he's so very bad, but without bad people, I would be so sad. Because without Papa's badness, tell me, if you would, how could wicked old Bacchanal ever look good? I feel like this author is like, a lot of these literature is like not against God or Jesus or anything, but a lot of them tend to, these authors, writers in general, tend to like feel the need to express that. I mean, they just choose to write it and say it. I mean, even people who work normal, regular jobs, 9 to 5s, they just want to choose to work a regular 9 to 5 because that's what they've seen their parents do. Whether they want to take the role in society and the responsibility as a human on this earth, just like kind of going with the flow of everybody else, normal traffic, you know? And maybe they feel the same way about God that a writer writes about it, but they never say it, you know? We hardly ever hear anybody opposing the idea of God. You do, you know, but especially if you're raised in it, or, I don't know. Okay, my whole thing is I'm not disrespecting, I'm simply reading words out of a book, but I'm gonna read this last, I'm gonna go up to chapter 50. 48, just like St. Augustine. Bokanon, I learned from Castle's book, was born in 1891. He was an African-American born, no, he was African, born an Episcopalian and a British subject on the island of Tobago. He was christened Lionel Boyd Johnson. He was the youngest of 6 children born to a wealthy family. His family's wealth derived from the discovery by Bokanon's grandfather of $250,000 in buried pirate treasure, presumably a treasure of Blackbeard of Edward Teach. Blackbeard's treasure was reinvested by Bokanon's family in asphalt, copra, cacao, livestock, and poultry. Young Lionel Boyd Johnson was educated in Episcopal schools, did well as a student, was more interested in ritual than most. As a youth, for all his interest in the outward trappings of organized religion, he seems to have been a carouser, for he invites us to sing along with him in his 14th Calypso. When I was young, I was so gay and mean, and I drank and chased the girls, just like young St. Augustine. St. Augustine, you got to be a saint, so if I get to be one also, please, mama, don't you faint. This is hilarious, his author. A fish pitched up by an angry sea, 49. Lionel Boyd Johnson was intellectually ambitious enough in 1911 to sail alone from Tobago to London in a sloop named the Lady Slipper. His purpose was to gain a higher education. He enrolled in the London School of Economics and Political Science. His education was interrupted by the First World War. He enlisted in the infantry, fought with distinction, was commissioned in the field, was mentioned 4 times in dispatches. He was gassed in the Second Battle of Ypres, was hospitalized for 2 years and then discharged. And he set sail for home, for Tobago, alone in the Lady Slipper again. When only 80 miles from home, he was stopped and searched by a German submarine, the U-99. He was taken prisoner, and his little vessel was used by the Huns for target practice. While still surfaced, the submarine was surprised and captured by the British destroyer, the Raven. Johnson and the Germans were taken on aboard the destroyer, and the U-99 was sunk. The Raven was bound for the Mediterranean, but it never got there. It lost its steering and could only wallow helplessly to make ground, clockwise circles. It came to rest at last in the Cape Verde Islands. Johnson stayed in those islands for 8 months, awaiting some sort of transportation to the Western Hemisphere. He got a job at last as a crewman on a fishing vessel that was carrying illegal immigrants to New Bedford, Massachusetts. He got a job as the last crewman on a fishing vessel that was carrying illegal immigrants to New Bedford, Massachusetts. The vessel was blown ashore at Newport, Rhode Island. By that time, Johnson had developed a conviction that something was trying to get to him somewhere for some reason. or something was trying to get him somewhere for some reason, so he stayed in Newport for a while to see if he had a destiny there. He worked as a gardener and a carpenter on the famous Rumford estate. During that time, he glimpsed many distinguished guests of the Rumfords, among them J.P. Morgan, General John J. Pershing, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Enrico Caruso, Warren Gamaliel Harding, and Harry Houdini. And it was during that time that the First World War came to an end, having killed 10 million persons and wounded 20 million, Johnson among them. When the war ended, the young rake Hal of the Rumford family, Remington Rumford, IV, proposed to sail his steam yacht, the Sherazade, around the world, visiting Spain, France, Italy, Greece, India, China, and Japan. He invited Johnson to accompany him as first mate, and Johnson agreed. Johnson saw many wonders of the world on the voyage. The Scheherazade was rammed in a fog in Bombay Harbor, and only Johnson survived. He stayed in India for 2 years, becoming a follower of Mohandas K. Gandhi. He was arrested for leading groups that protested British rule by lying down on railroad tracks. When his jail term was over, he shipped at Crown expense to his home in Tobago. There he built another schooner, which he called the Lady Slipper II, and he sailed her about the Caribbean, an idler, still seeking the storm that would drive him ashore on what was unmistakably his destiny. An idler. In 1922, he sought shelter from a hurricane in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, which country was then occupied by United States Marines. Johnson was approached there by a brilliant, self-educated, idealistic Marine deserter named Earl McCabe. McCabe was a corporal. He had just stolen his company's recreation fund. He offered Johnson $500 for transportation to Miami. The two set sail for Miami. But a gale hounded the schooner onto the rocks of San Lorenzo. The boat went down. Johnson and McCabe, absolutely naked, managed to swim ashore, as Balkan himself reports the adventure. A fish pitched up by the angry sea. I gasped on land, and I became me. He was enchanted by the mystery of becoming ashore naked on an unfamiliar island. He resolved to let the adventure run its full course, resolved to see just how far a man might go, emerging naked from salt water. It was a rebirth for him. Be like a baby, the Bible say. So I stay like a baby to this very day. How he came by the name of Balkan was very simple. Bokanon was a pronunciation given the name Johnson in the island's English dialect. As for that dialect, the dialect of San Lorenzo was both easy to understand and difficult to write down. I say it is easy to understand, but I speak only for myself. Others have found it as incomprehensible as Basque, so my understanding of it may be telepathic. Philip Castle, in his book, gave a phonetic demonstration of the dialect and caught its flavor very well. He chose for his sample the San Lorenzo version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Stars. In American English, one version of that immortal poem goes like this. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, shining in the sky so bright, like a tea tray in the night. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. In San Lorenzo dialect, according to Castle, the same poem went like this. Svent quil, let poor store, Kojate Vantor bat vuyor, Prishinik on les chaise au bras, come on teach on low na, Svent kiel, let poor store, Kojate Vansor bat vuyor. Shortly after Johnson became Bokanon, incidentally, the lifeboat of his shattered ship was found on shore. The boat was later painted gold and made the bed of the island's chief executive. There is a legend made up by Bokanon, Philip Castle wrote in his book, that the golden boat will sail again when the end of the world is near. Just a bunch of literature, I suppose. Probably didn't learn much from this vid, but I just gotta keep going. Maybe these books will be worth something later. Peace. When there's no more books and they all disappear.